All right, guys, today we're going to talk about how to form your introductions and conclusions for your research paper. So first of all, let's talk about what we're going to learn today. First, we're going to discuss the purposes of an introduction, and then I'm going to give you several examples of how you can write an introduction. There are several different approaches depending on what you're writing and what you prefer to do as a writer, and I'll give you examples of each. The second thing we're going to talk about is how to make a conclusion. Basically, we're talking about what should and should not be in your conclusion. In the big picture, introductions are probably a little bit more difficult to write because you want to really bring the reader in and get them excited about reading. Conclusions, on the other hand, generally tend to be your own opinion about what you already studied, and they seem to become a little bit more natural. So I'm going to spend more time on introductions just because I think all of us need a little bit more work on them. So first, introductions. What you want to do first and foremost is make a solid first impression. If you are handing this paper off to somebody other than myself, you need to make sure that your first impression is really strong. This starts with the very first sentence of your introduction. If you start off with, "I'm going to talk about Buddhism today," that does not leave us with a very good first impression. It shows that you did not take time to think of a good way to bring the reader in, and it also shows that you have no interest in your subject as well. So you want to make a good first impression. It's going to be a broad roadmap of your paper. Now, when we talked about your thesis statement, we said that it was a map for your paper. Well, your introduction is a little bit, when I say more broad, what I mean is you don't list anything that you're going to discuss. You're going to say attributes of Hinduism, like Hinduism is a religion. It guides people through their daily lives. It gives them a class system so that their society can run more effectively. Something like that. Now, I didn't say anything specific about how his Hinduism runs or affects society or anything like that. It basically gets the reader thinking, what is this person going to talk about when they say it organizes society? Lastly, you need to spark their interest so that when they're done with your conclusion paragraph, they want to keep reading. If you have a solid introduction, then they will keep going. They'll keep reading. They'll want to see what you have to say. They'll want to see what kind of information you researched and found and how you put it together. If you have an introduction that's so-so, they might not necessarily want to read it. Now, for school purposes, I have to read your paper. But when you get into the real world, let's say you're making a job proposal or you're making a proposal for something to go into your neighborhood, if you don't have a good introduction, nobody's going to care what you have to say or how valid your points are because they think that you're a weak writer from the very start. So, how to write an introduction. First, you need to start thinking about the questions or question that you are trying to answer. So, when you made your thesis statement and I asked you to answer the question, so what things came to mind when I said so what? You can talk about those things in general terms in your introduction. Next, you can decide on how general or broad your opening should be. Sorry, my picture was a little big, so it cut off the word broad. But when I say how general or broad your opening should be, what I mean is how specific should you be when discussing certain events. So let's go back to Hinduism. I mentioned that they had a system for organizing their society. So my question to you is, do you mention that it's a caste system in your introduction? Or do you just say it really defines people into four different groups and you leave it at that? That's a decision you need to make. Next, you need to grab their attention. Usually you do this in a research paper by providing a really cool, solid, fact that makes somebody step back and go, whoa, I need to keep reading this because this sounds pretty cool. Um, so we can talk about how to do those. And you need to pay special attention to your first sentence. Your first sentence is key. It is the first thing that they read right after your title, and most titles just describe what you're writing. So if your first sentence is weak or does not spark any interest whatsoever, there are times in your life where you may have people put your paper down and not read any more than that. So your first sentence has to be solid. And you want to be straightforward and confident. If you sound like you're unsure about what you're writing or that you're not really interested in what's going on, your reader's going to feel the same way when they're done. So if you're like, Hinduism is all right, it's a religion that's in India and there's lots of Indian people that follow it, and they're going to read that and they're going to go, well, this person's not into it, why should I be? And they're going to put your paper down no matter how good the rest of it is. So ways to write an introduction. I'm going to talk about 5 different ways. So the first way is start with an intriguing example. So you can explain a situation where, let's say, the gods of your religion are at war, okay? Or if you're doing Islam, you can say one of the really difficult times Prophet Muhammad had while he was traveling and spreading the word about Islam. Picking a situation, describing the situation, and ending with your thesis statement. That's how you start with an intriguing example. You could start with a provocative quotation. So something like the Buddha once said, and I don't know, you can fill in the blank. And then after that, you can say, well, the Buddhist faith follows, this is one of the things that the Buddhist faith follows, and, a lot of people follow it in these countries, and then put in your thesis statement. So it can literally be 3 sentences. You can start with a puzzling scenario. Now, this is one that a lot of people like to go to because it's more like telling a story. So my example is the Hindu faith defines a rigid class system. However, many important people in their society are not considered part of this class. They fulfill many tasks that most people would not want to do, yet society could not do without. How can a religion that seeks enlightenment force certain people to be outside of society? So you state a problem, and the last sentence of your introduction, or one of the last, because your thesis statement has to be the last one, can pose a question. It's like, how can a religion that's supposed to include everyone force some people out of society? That's weird by most people's standards. So it gets the reader thinking, and they're like, huh, maybe they'll answer it in their paper. Next, you could try a vivid or unexpected anecdote. Now, an anecdote is another way to say a story. Usually it's a personal story, so you need to make it about someone or something. So I kind of stuck along the same lines as the previous one about the caste system. So in India, there are many people that perform low-level occupations. I should say one such person is Ahmed. Ahmed and his family are in charge of maintaining the funeral pyre. This is a dirty job that is frowned upon by most people. However, the Hindu religion, which is followed by most Indian people, prohibit anyone outside of his class from performing this work. Okay, it's kind of unexpected. It's like, how can someone that's so important to their society be excluded? So, um, that is how you do an anecdote. It's more along the lines of a story than in the previous one where you're having a puzzling scenario. Both of them are stories. The vivid and unexpected anecdote is about a specific person. The puzzling scenario is not necessarily about a specific person. And the last one, a thought-provoking question. So this one you can literally start off with, how can a religion whose sole purpose is to ensure people's path to the afterlife exclude certain people from society? You know, again, that's a big question, and a lot of people have problems with that when they study the Hindu faith. But in this, if this is your first sentence of your introduction, you're not telling them what religion you're talking about. You're not telling them what part of the world it's from. You're not telling them anything else. So you're in the rest of your introduction, you're going to lead them into, these people do specific jobs in society but still can't participate in it. These people are left very poor and very uneducated with no hope of moving up. And then you put your thesis statement. So this one, a thought-provoking question, is meant to get people's kind of blood boiling, get them to be emotional. So to kind of bridge the gap here, bridge. Introductions and conclusions are very much like bridges. Introductions are when people start walking over the bridge. You get them excited about something. They're going into a new place. Conclusions are when you send them home. It is you're leaving them feeling good about your paper and you want them to enjoy the experience that they just had. So the purpose of a conclusion. Notice my little guy at the finish line. That's the end of your paper. You're finished. You want to end on a happy note. So first, you're going to have the final say on the issues that you have raised in your paper. You get to form an opinion in your conclusion about your specific religion. Next, you're going to summarize your thoughts. Now, what I mean by this is if you look at your thesis statement and you talked about the holy books, their holidays, and some of their traditions, you need to make a summarization about not summarizing what they are, but you need to say the holy days in the holy book are very important to the religion because, and fill in the blank. You need to demonstrate the importance of your ideas. If there's something that you think really hits home about your religion that everyone should know, you need to put it in your conclusion. And finally, you need to propel your reader to a new view on the subject. Should they look into Hinduism? Should they question how Sikhism functions? Should people start embracing certain parts of Sikhism? You know, um, make them question something. And finally, you need to end on a positive note. If you started your introduction like we did with Hinduism on Hinduism leaves some people out of their society, that's not good. You want to end on a positive note. Find a way to transition to be like, okay, Hinduism might do this in society, but they do this for these people. You need to find a way to say that. So, how to form a conclusion. First, you need to play the so what game, just like you did when you made your thesis statement. Why should people learn about your religion? So, if you imagine yourself sitting down with a friend, and the friend asks you, why are you writing about this religion? And you're like, because this religion is cool. Imagine them asking you, so what? Why is it cool? You need to have an answer for that, and that's what needs to go in your conclusion. You need to return to the theme or themes in your introduction. So, going back to the one about society or Hindu society, you need to bring that up again in your conclusion and be like, okay, I'm readdressing this after reading my paper. This is what I think about that problem about Hinduism. Or maybe you found that it's a good thing about Hinduism. You need to point out broader consequences. So, taking the Hinduism thing, what consequence do the untouchables who are not included in society have for Hindu society? You need to make a conclusion about it. Or you need to propose a course of action, a solution, or a question for further study. Maybe you have no answer. Maybe your conclusion is that people need to think about this some more. You need to state that for the reader in your conclusion. Now, finally, we're going to end with this. These are things that you should not do. Notice the unhappy face. That's the look I will give you if you do these things in your conclusion. Don't laugh. All right, first, you never, ever, ever start your conclusion with the words in conclusion or in summary. Those are horrible. I know that it's your conclusion because it's the last paragraph of your paper. You don't need to tell me that it's your conclusion. I know. Why? Because it's the last paragraph of your paper. Um, in a way, it's kind of disrespectful to the reader because they should just know you don't need to tell them. You do not need to poorly restate your thesis. If you just simply flip your thesis statement around and you say Hinduism is based on these three things, you cannot flip it around and go, these three things make up the religion of Hinduism. That's poorly stated, and no matter how good your paper was, when the reader reads that, they will think that you don't know what you're doing. Next, you do not need to introduce a new topic. This is not the place to bring up something that you didn't have space for in your paper. Leave it alone. You're just doing one of these four things in your conclusion. Next, you do not need to be over emotional or sentimental. If you're talking about, let's go back to the untouchables. If you're talking about the untouchables, you should not make people feel so sorry for the untouchables and isn't it bad? And I had a Kleenex next to me whenever I was reading that on the website and I just don't know what to do. If you start going that route, you're going to lose them because they're just like, what is going on? You need to stop. You need to think about it. And you just need to question and present it to your reader as if they were an intelligent adult and they can figure it out on their own. Finally, you do not need to include extra information that you should have put in your paper. So those of you that have like one or two note cards in Noodle Tools that you could not find a way to fit in your paper without making it feel awkward, this is not the place to put it. Just leave them alone. That is why you do extra note cards, so that if you need them, you have them. If you don't need them and they don't fit, then they don't work. But they're in your back pocket in case you need another place to go. So, to wrap things up, introductions bring in the reader, they make them want to read more, and your thesis statement is the last sentence. Just so you know, your introduction can be anywhere from 3 to 5 sentences. It's 3 to 5 sentences. Same thing with your conclusion, 3 to 5 sentences. You can tell the reader why you wrote your paper, and you can do it in one of the ways we discussed. You take a position, and you need to end on a positive note. Tomorrow in class, you will sit down in the computer lab, and this is one of the first things I want you to start doing is forming your intro conclusion statement so that I can read it before you leave school on Friday.